Hello everyone! Welcome back to Video Game Classroom. My name is Patrick, and these are my top 10 video games of the 6th generation. The reason I wanted to choose the 6th generation as my first top 10 list was because it was the generation that had the biggest influence on me. I of course started gaming around the 4th generation with the Genesis and the Super Nintendo, and of course I was there for PlayStation 1 and N64, but the generation that had the biggest impact on me, that really helped shape me as a gamer and kind of sort of like a coming of age story, was definitely the PS2, the Xbox, and the Gamecube era. And I just wanted to pay respect to that and give you my top 10 list of my favorite games from that generation. So let's get right into it. This is number 10.
This pathetic planet from the face of the galaxy.
So yeah, I had to go with Star Wars Knights of the Old Republic, which was on Xbox and PC. Of course, you can see here I have the original, well, this is the Game of the Year edition, I guess. Big Box PC edition. The reason is because I never owned an original Xbox. As big of a gamer as I am, I never really had much desire to own Xbox. I played Halo at a friend's one night while on a sleepover, and there were only ever a few games that really caught my eye, and unfortunately Halo wasn't one of them. I played it, wasn't that interested in it, but one of those games that did catch my eye was Star Wars Knights of the Old Republic. And I found out it was also on PC, so I bought this thinking I would be able to play it on my mom's PC, but unfortunately I wasn't able to. I bought it and it played the game, but with no color and no sound, I believe. So I don't know what happened, but my mom's PC was not quite there. It was just good enough to get the game running, but not at optimal settings, or even in an almost playable state. So I had no idea what was going on, and had to wait another few years until my brother got a laptop so I could play this one summer, and I spent the entire summer playing Knights of the Republic and fell in love with it. It hasn't held up as well with its kind of dated, clunky, turn-based combat, but I still feel this is the best Star Wars story told since 1983. Honestly, I wasn't a fan of the prequels. The sequel trilogy started out okay, but ended terribly. And I think that this is still the best story outside of the original trilogy from the 70s and 80s. And this was the game that got me into BioWare, and eventually my love for Mass Effect, and me purchasing a 360 just for that saga as well. So I owe a lot to Star Wars Knights of the Old Republic, and that's why it's my number 10. So yeah, sticking with RPGs, this one from the other side of the world, the Japanese RPG. This is my favorite Final Fantasy, Final Fantasy 12. I know everybody worships number 10 from the PS2 era, but for me, the one that really did it for me was Final Fantasy 12. I don't know what it was. Maybe it had to do with its very Star Wars-esque vibes, but it was just something that came along at the right time for me. I'm not a big JRPG guy by any means. It's one of my least favorite genres, actually. But every once in a while, something comes along, and I just fall right in love with it. And yeah, the story can be a bit slow, and there's some pacing issues throughout, but I just fell in love with all of the characters. The combat was fluid, and it was very customizable. It really felt like a single-player MMO. There was just so much to do in such a open world, and you could really just get lost in it, grinding, side questing, pursuing the story, whatever you wanted to do, and I thought it was incredible. So much so that I actually bought the Steelbook edition for PS4, the PS4 remake the Zodiac Age, or the remaster, and I absolutely love it. I also got the Collector's Edition strategy guide for the game to help me through my journey through Ivalice. I wanted to get the Collector's Edition of this game. Unfortunately, that was like $250, so I decided to pass on that, but I'm still very happy with the purchases that I made, and I definitely need to pick up Final Fantasy XII for the DS as well to kind of complete my collection of the game. Man, so far we're just killing it with RPGs. We have another JRPG here, and this is one that really defined my childhood. Kingdom Hearts 1. Sorry if it's a little glary, I know the sun's right there, but man, this is still my original copy, and from when I was just 12 years old. I remember watching Disney Channel, shows like Even Stevens, and seeing commercials for Kingdom Hearts. I wasn't a particularly big Final Fantasy fan, like I just mentioned with JRPGs, but I knew the characters, and of course I liked Disney somewhat, and just seeing that all together was like, it was mesmerizing, and I was like, I have to play this game. And I was one of the people, I remember even as a kid, being on the train going, this game's gonna be big, and people being like, Final Fantasy and Disney, that's not gonna work. And lo and behold, here we are, almost 20 years later, and it's one of the biggest franchises in gaming. I love the sequel. I loved Chain of Memories, which I still own back there. Love Chain of Memories. I love the sequel. I love that whole PS2 era of Kingdom Hearts games. Outside of that, it really has gone downhill, but I'll never forget the time that I had with Kingdom Hearts 1. Very simplistic, straightforward combat, but a story that really, that really swept me away, and it got me so hyped for the sequel. I would spend hours on old message boards that no longer exist, like AnsemReport.com, back when there was rumors that a sequel may never even happen. And when we did get that green light and Disney approved of it and it got underway, I remember just being so excited. And it just is a game, the original is a game that just means so much to me, and really one of the defining games of my childhood. Now this is another game that I would say defined my childhood. Now I know that's kind of a questionable thing to say given the game's nature, but I had parents that did allow me to play these games, and thankfully I knew the difference between right and wrong, and I was very grounded even as a child, so I knew all these things were bad, but I still loved this game anyway. Grand Theft Auto 3 for the PlayStation 2. This game took the world by storm in the early 2000s. I remember being at Best Buy and there being like, I'd never seen this before. This game was being depleted on the shelves. There was only a few copies left, and a guy came up to me, just a random customer, and he said, hey, you here for Grand Theft Auto 3? I'm like a 12-year-old kid. I'm like, no. And 2, I don't know what that is. I had never heard of this franchise, and we're already on the 3rd one? What's going on here? This guy, though, really helped, catch my interest or pique my interest, because after he talked to me, I was like, I need to figure out what this game is. Then my brother's talking to me, and he's like, hey, you need to play Grand Theft Auto 3. It's this game that apparently allows you to do everything and go anywhere. And my brain is like a block of Swiss cheese. There's a lot of holes in it, so I can't really envision things in my head very well. So I had to see it to figure out what he was trying to say. And we went to Blockbuster, and I remember we were about to leave, But right before we did, I circled back around and saw Grand Theft Auto 3 on the shelves, and he was like, hey, you better go get Mom. She's about to check out, and you better give her this game. You better go get it. You better give it to her so we can rent it. And I rented it, and I was just immediately blown away. Just the freedom to do anything you wanted. I couldn't believe it. I had never played anything like this. And it was just mind-boggling that you could get in cars, drive around, and, you know, of course, as a kid, I used the cheat codes and cause destruction and all this stuff, but just the simple act of, like, walking around a city back in the early 2000s was ridiculous. And of course, now it's reached a whole new level, and it's gotten even beyond video games. It doesn't even feel like it's, you know, a typical game anymore. It's just so larger than life. But back with Grand Theft Auto 3, you could even say it felt larger than life. It was just something that, you know, no one had really seen, at least on that scale, and it was really a trendsetter, and so many games were going to copy it afterwards, and it was just such a wonderful game. And the reason that I picked that one is because it has so much more meaning to me. I think that San Andreas is probably the better one of the PS2 trilogy, but definitely GTA 3 means more to me. If you know me, you know we couldn't have a top 10 list without Splinter Cell. This was, outside of KOTOR, that was, you know, I mentioned there were a few games that caught my eye on Xbox. This was the game that caught my eye on Xbox. I remember, obviously being a big fan of stealth games with Siphon Filter and Metal Gear Solid. I had just gotten into Metal Gear Solid at this point, but I remember seeing this game and being just so envious of Microsoft and Xbox that this game was not on PS2. It eventually came to PS2, so I was grateful for that, but it was a lesser port. It was a little bit weaker, but I remember just being enamored with the concept, with the character. I got to play it at a friend's house, and I knew, I was like, this is going to be one of my favorite games of all time if I can ever get my hands on this. And while I have to say that along with like San Andreas, I think Chaos Theory is probably the better one of the three, but this one just meant more to me due to my jealousy and my overall interest in the original product. And it's just a phenomenal game. I love espionage. I love stealth. It's my favorite genre, of course. I love shows that are like stuffy and boring and political. So this was right up my alley, and I couldn't wait to play it. And when I did, man, I just knew right away that this was going to be a game that I was going to cherish forever, and I always have.
Defeating Ares, Kratos, the once mortal warrior, became the new god of war. However, Kratos soon found himself alone on Olympus, shunned by his fellow gods.
So yeah, we've entered top 5, and this is where the real heavy hitters come in. And I'm going to kick it off with one of my favorite games from one of my favorite franchises of all time, and that's God of War 2. I remember when the original God of War was teased in PlayStation Magazine, in PSM, and I was looking at Kratos and looking at the game, and I thought, wow, this looks incredibly stupid. It looked way too like meatheadish. I'm not a fan of like macho characters or real like burly action movies, anything like that. So this was not something that really appealed to me. You know, I like the more slender, sleek, silver-tongued kind of characters, and obviously that's why I love stealth, things like that. But I remember going to Blockbuster and just deciding to rent it because I think I was bored and there was no other games out at the time. And I rented God of War 1, and I knew immediately this was going to be my game of the year. And it was. It ended up being my 2005 game of the year, and it set me on a path to, absolute God of War fandom. I own every game now, and I'm completely obsessed with mythology. I was already interested in beforehand, but this really kind of helped kickstart my interest in mythology, Greek and Norse. And I remember picking up God of War 2, being so thankful that it was not going to be on the PS3 because I didn't want to spend $600 to play it. And they decided to release it for PS2 after the PS3 had already launched. And this game just improved upon the sequel in every way. Bigger set pieces, more fluid combat, overall more incredible story. The beginning when Kratos comes down from the heavens to Rhodes and gets betrayed by Zeus, and it was phenomenal. Right from the get-go, I knew I was in for a wild ride. This existed at a time when you had other beat-em-up franchises or other 3D hack-and-slash games like Ninja Gaiden and Devil May Cry. I always liked those other games, and I knew that they were superior in terms of gameplay, but the game that had the better story, the better characters, in my opinion, was always God of War, and God of War 2 was definitely, of the original, trilogy, I guess you could say, not in counting Ascension or the PSP titles, the original Greek trilogy, God of War 2 is my absolute favorite, and I believe it is the best one. When I think of feel-good games, no game comes to my mind more than Metroid Prime for the Nintendo GameCube. This was the game that got me into the franchise, and to this day, I'd say once a month, I think to myself, man, I'd really like to go back and play Metroid Prime. It's just a game that I'm constantly nostalgic about, constantly in love with. It is such a phenomenal video game. I believe that much like with Grand Theft Auto and Splinter Cell, Echo's Prime 2 is probably the better game. It might be the best Metroid game overall, actually, in my opinion. But the one that means the most to me, the one that's my favorite, is Metroid Prime 1. It got me into the franchise. I just love the world of Talon 4 and the intrigue. And also it just kind of helped get me over my initial fear of getting lost in a video game, getting stuck, uncovering puzzles, things like that. I'm not particularly good at those, so it was definitely something that kind of helped push me to get better at, and I'm grateful to that. I was never a big fan of shooters at the time, but this was a game that kind of helped ease me into shooters as well. Kind of mixed exploration and platforming and all of that, and I just love this game so much. But yeah, I remember also reading when I first heard about this game was in the 2002 Electronic Gaming Monthly magazine, or 2003. It was 2003. They were reviewing Wind Waker, and I remember reading the reviews for Wind Waker and then seeing the praise for Metroid Prime, and people I remember initially weren't on board because it was a first-person shooter, and they weren't all about that. They were thinking it was going to be ruined, but alas, they were wrong, and the game went on to become a huge success. It spawned 2 sequels, and then hopefully a 3rd sequel, but we may all be dead before that ever comes out. But for now, we have at least Metroid Prime 1 to carry us by. Speaking of Electronic Gaming Monthly, that copy is what got me into Legend of Zelda the Wind Waker for Nintendo GameCube. I was not a Zelda fan growing up because I wasn't, like with Metroid, I wasn't very good at puzzles. So when I get stuck in a dungeon, I would stop. I remember playing Link's Awakening on my Game Boy that I got for Christmas in 1994. Or maybe it was 1995, one or the other. And I never wanted to play Zelda again. And also, I really wasn't allowed to, because in my house, those games were seen as lame and for losers. So I had like brothers who would bully me and be like, "You can't play those games. No, we got to play games like, GoldenEye and stealth games," which I loved, but sports games. You had to play games that were cool. You couldn't play these kind of games. And at the time, I really didn't think much of it, because I was like, well, whatever. I'm enjoying the games that I'm playing, so not a big deal. But then this came out, and I remember looking at the art style and initially thinking, oh, this looks stupid. Looks like a game for kiddies. And then I watched gameplay, and I got that Electronic Gaming Monthly copy, which I still have. And let me get that. So yeah, here's my copy of EGM, the review for Wind Waker. And I remember reading through it. I think it might have been at just a Publix or something, and being like, wow, I've got to play this game. I've got to get this game. I've even got I think it came with a map too. Well, maybe that was from the guidebook, I don't know. But I remember just being like, I've got to play this game. And I convinced my mom to take me to EB Games at the time and pre-order the game, because I also wanted to play Ocarina of Time and Ocarina of Time Master Quest, which was starting to be depleted because we were nearing the release of the game and there wasn't that many left. So I played that, blew through it, loved it, but didn't appreciate it at the time. And then I got into Wind Waker, and it was love at first sight. I knew that this was going to be another feel-good game. This was going to be one of my favorite games of all time, and it has remained so. And it is still my favorite Zelda game to this day. I love sailing. I love the ease of the puzzles. I love the world. The music, the soundtrack is just the absolute best. I've 100%ed it multiple times. I love the Wind Waker, and while I do think once again that there is a game that is better, like Ocarina of Time, maybe even now Breath of the Wild, the one that has a place in my heart above all is The Legend of Zelda: The Wind Waker.
What is that stance? Huh. That gun.
If you know me, of course, we couldn't go through a top 10 without talking about Metal Gear, the greatest franchise ever in the history of video games. And at number 2, we have Metal Gear Solid 3 Snake Eater. This is my original copy from Sears in 2004. And this was one of those games that just was godly the moment it was released. There was no way you could say the game was bad. It improved upon the stealth mechanics by making it a little bit more like Splinter Cell, taking it a little more seriously with hiding in the grass or hiding within the foliage and having camo and face paint and whatnot. It really kind of had the survival aspect to it, where you could stitch up your wounds and eat alligators and stuff like that. But it had, of course, the great bombastic, over-the-top Metal Gear anime with the perfect, fictional history. And oh my god, I'm losing words trying to describe how enamored I was with the game. Young Ocelot may even be better than Old Ocelot. The boss, Volgan, the race with the Shagohod at the end, of course the James Bond intro. Everything about Metal Gear Solid 3 is top tier. There isn't one bad thing to say about it, except maybe that the pain is one of the worst boss fights in the entire franchise. But this was a game I played multiple times right away, and I just knew that it was going to be one of the best games of all time. And for a while it was. I even wrote a review on IMDb a long time ago calling it the holy grail of video games. And it remained at my top spot for a long time until eventually I came to the realization that there was one game that was better. And that game is our number one.
Our boy is right on schedule.
So here it is, the greatest game of the 6th generation and the greatest game of all time, Metal Gear Solid 2: Sons of Liberty. This game, I remember initially playing this game at the request of a kid I hated. He was so mean to me growing up. He was such an awful kid. But you know, like, I think he wanted to be my friend, but he realized that, like, you know, I was too lame, and to be a friend with me would be, like, the worst thing ever. So he would just have to always make fun of me. But he would he knew I was into video games, and he was as well. And he would talk to me and be like, hey, have you ever, you know, played this game, that game? But one day in gym, he came up to me and was like, hey, you ever heard of Metal Gear Solid? And I go, yeah. I've seen the box, like, from PlayStation 1. I said, but it didn't have any, like, art on it, and so I didn't know anything about it, and I wasn't interested in it. It was just a white box with red letters, right? And he goes, yeah, well, you know, you should check out Metal Gear Solid 2. At the time, Substance had just come out. I was like, try out Substance. So I went to Blockbuster and I rented Substance. And I remember not knowing what was going on, but being very intrigued. Being like, this is really cool. I got all the way up to the Rex, Ray, and Rose Metal Gear fight at the end, and I couldn't beat it in time. So I took it back to Blockbuster, but then I re-rented it so I could get it for another 7 days, and then beat it. And was floored, even though I was confused as all hell. So I went out to GameStop or EB. I got, which I still have in my Metal Gear case, I got a used copy of the original Metal Gear Solid for PlayStation 1, and that blew me away. It was a little easier to understand. It put MGS2 into a better context, and that one became my favorite game of all time. And then, like I just mentioned, as Metal Gear Solid 3 came out, I was very excited, and that became my favorite game of all time. Then, when Metal Gear Solid 4 came out, I got a job so I could get a PlayStation 3, and I took a week off of work so I could play the game, and I beat the game 5 times in a row, and that became my favorite game of all time. But throughout all of that, the game that I thought about the most, and the game that just, as I got older, I appreciated more and understood more, was Metal Gear Solid 2. So, you know, it was initially here, and then it fell, and then as I played the other Metal Gears, but as I was playing those, I realized, like, how good MGS2 was. And as our world changed, and as the digital age rose, and all of these things came into light, I realized how accurate MGS2 was, and how its themes could be brought into, you know, our real world, and how, like, Kojima just hit the nail on the head with predicting so much. The degradation of society, the rise of memes, the loss of identity, you know, things like that. I just was blown away. And it was probably around 2009, 2010, somewhere around there, that I realized that, man, Metal Gear Solid 2 is just the greatest game ever made. It's got the most Easter eggs, it's goofy, it's serious, it's got the best characters. You are essentially the main character, with Raiden being basically a digital age grunt, a video game player, going through this, you know, simulation. And it just kind of, it was one of those games where I had no idea what was going to happen next. You know, with a video game, you can kind of tell, like, for example, I just got done playing Ghost of Tsushima. Like, I could see what was going to happen at the end. Like, okay, I was going to do this thing, but really that thing was going to happen, right? With Metal Gear, I never saw what was going to happen next. And basically, the whole time was just me like, huh? No! What? Like, over and over and over again. And very few games do that. And I can't say enough about Metal Gear Solid 2. It means so much to me. It's just the best game of all time. I ended up getting Metal Gear Solid 2 Substance for Xbox. Another mean kid too, the kid that would tease me about Splinter Cell being on Xbox, would always be like, yeah, we got Metal Gear Solid 2, the updated version. You guys got that? And you go, yeah, we ended up getting that too at PlayStation. So, you know, whatever. And then I got the sealed edition for Xbox. I have a black label case for PS2. The Greatest Hits edition is actually my first ever copy. That's the one I bought. So I got this. I've got the document of Metal Gear Solid 2, which goes a little bit more in depth with the development of the game and Kojima and his team, and how the game is also like a celebration and a recognition of their hard work and things like that. So it's definitely very cool to see. If you can get your hands on this, I recommend picking it up. I've got the novelization, which I've gone through, by Raymond Benson. Nice fantastic companion to it. And then of course I also have the Metal Gear Solid 2 strategy guide by Brady Games. I would really like to add a little more to my collection, some figures and stuff, but a lot of that's very expensive. But I think I owe it to that game, since, you know, I really do enjoy it so much, and I have to go back and play it soon. It's been many years since I've actually played Metal Gear. MGS5 just left such a bad taste in my mouth, but I'm not going to dwell on that. I'm just going to talk about how much I love MGS2, and yeah, that's really it. It's the greatest game ever made. Alright everyone, well that'll do it for this top 10 list. I hope you all enjoyed it. Be sure to leave a comment down below telling me what you thought, and list some of your top favorite games from the 6th generation. I'd love to see it. But yeah, that'll do it for me today. You can check out some of my other videos in the past on my review on The Last of Us Part 2, some of my new game pickups, and you can look forward to some other videos I have coming. Love letters to some of my favorite games, future reviews, stream highlights, things like that. I have some other stuff in the works as well, but that'll take a little more planning, a little more work, but just keep an eye out for it. You can also follow me on Twitch at VideoGameClassroom. I stream 5 days a week, around 11 a.m. to 3 p.m. Eastern Time, usually Wednesday through Sunday. I'd appreciate you stopping by, checking the stream out. And you can also follow me on some social media platforms, which I'll leave the link to down in the description below. But until then, take it easy, and I will see you next time.